Добрый день, дорогие друзья.
Good afternoon, dear friends. Let's start our session. My name is Angelina Davydova, and I'm an environmental journalist. I'm a person who regularly writes on green, sustainable, low-carbon development, including urban development, and I'm happy to welcome you here today to our session that is devoted to low-carbon urban development and practices of transitioning to green urban development. And our session is titled Eco Ambitions. Today we have a brilliant number of speakers present at the session, and I'll start with introducing them briefly. And I'll say immediately that, regrettably, the organizers allocated only 1 hour for our discussion, and regrettably, all the ideas, initiatives, and experience that our speakers have, that is too little time. That's why I will have to be a really strict moderator, and every time I will show you this 1 minute left when it is 1 minute left in your contribution. So I'll start presenting the speakers, introducing the speakers with Felipe Calderon, who was president of Mexico from 2006 to 2012, and you have heard his presentation at the panel session where he showed the main priorities and impetuses for sustainable low-carbon development. Thank you for joining us. Anton Kolbachevsky, head of the Department for Environmental Management and Protection of Moscow City. Evgeny Gasho, Analytical Center under the government of the Russian Federation, expert and head of chamber. Tadashi Matsumoto, a coordinator on National Urban Policy Program from the OECD. David Miller, director on C4 cities for Toronto in North America. Salvador Rueda, head of the Agency of City Environment from Barcelona, and George Ferguson, ex-mayor of the city of Bristol. Thank you, dear friends, for joining our discussion today, and thank you also for expressing your willingness to share your experience. So I hope we will use the next 1 hour to look in detail, in a tactical and inspirational way, to discuss the practices that you are implementing in your activities, in your cities, in your work in other countries. And like we have seen and heard at the panel session, and when Felipe Calderon was also speaking, we understand that low-carbon urban development is a critical issue today. On the one hand, cities emit a lot of greenhouse gases, and there is a lot of waste and air pollution, water pollution, and it is the cities that are responsible for that all, and they continue growing on our planet. But on the other hand, cities are also on the other front, on the front of the greatest damage of the environmental pollution. And the matter of mitigating environmental pollution and adapting are key matters for further urban development and for the further development of the whole planet. I will also add at the beginning, like we have heard today, cities at many extents come at the forefront of new technologies, new solutions, and new policies in green development, low-carbon development, and at large. If we consider the UN climatic negotiations, we will see new actors such as cities and regions that start playing more and more role. So I will start this session with this optimistic tune, and first of all, I would like to give the floor to David Miller, who represents C40 cities, and who, I believe, will tell us something about the big picture, the global picture on what is going on with green practices in the cities and how the cities integrate low-carbon components to urban development, sustainability, and how the cities can combine environmental and social policies. David, you're welcome.
Very much, Angelina, for that introduction. I do want to acknowledge President Calderon's presentation earlier today in the plenary, which I thought set the background for the very important role of cities very clearly. I thought in my few minutes I might very quickly explain what the C40 is and then give my perspective as the North American Regional Director and also as the former Mayor of Toronto, Canada, on why the actions of cities are so critical today on these environmental issues. So first of all, the C40 is a group originally of 40 but now of 96 of the world's largest metropolises. Its full name is the C40 Climate Leadership Group, and it's a group convened by mayors to address climate change globally. It represents approximately 700 million people in those cities, and about plus or minus a quarter of the world's economy is represented in those cities. So the mayors of those cities have an enormous role to play, and our research shows that urban areas in general, not just the C40 cities, contribute about 70% of greenhouse gases to the world. So we can see the people are in cities, the carbon pollution is in cities, and the economy is in cities. So the best strategies to combat climate change in those cities and from the C40 mayors will not only address carbon, but will also think about social issues, equity, inclusivity, and also, of course, the economics. So, why can mayors make a difference and how? Well, they can make a difference because the emissions from cities are very clearly mainly in four sectors. From buildings, how we heat and cool buildings, from how we generate electricity, from the transportation system, and from how we manage our waste. And in C40 cities and other urban areas around the world, mayors are leading strategies in all of those areas that are significantly reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and in the best strategies, ensuring that the least well-off have a voice and that jobs are created for all. So I'll give some examples. Shenzhen, China, has a cap and trade system. Now, in my country, in Canada, there's debate about cap and trade and carbon tax. Which should we do, or any? Shenzhen, China went ahead and has had a cap and trade system that applies to industrial enterprises. Economic productivity has gone up and emissions down. A remarkable testament to the effectiveness of this system. Tokyo, Japan, has a cap and trade system on buildings, and emissions are down again. My home city of Toronto had a very interesting program in partnership with the gas company and the private sector to reduce the use of gas in buildings to heat and cool buildings. That partnership's existed for over 20 years, the Better Buildings Partnership. Highly effective, again, in rejuvenating buildings, lowering emissions, and lowering the cost for building owners and tenants, so creating economic efficiencies. Many more examples in buildings, but I'm cognizant there's a lot of contributions to be made. Transportation. Variety of policies that need to make a difference in transportation going forwards, but in large urban areas, mass transit is critical. And we're seeing C40 cities and others invest significantly in mass transit. Addis Ababa, the first light rail system in all of Africa, and it was designed thinking about the needs of its customers, who are primarily women. And it thought about what do women need to do during the day and where they need to go in the design of the system and how it's working. Very interesting example of bringing together social goals and lowering emissions. Curitiba, very famous for bus rapid transit. The C40 now is a network of cities that are building bus rapid transit in cities globally, particularly in Latin America. We also have a network of cities that are converting mass transit to electric buses. Very, very important in lowering emissions, and as cities have to buy new bus fleets, it's very logical at this moment to convert to clean electricity. Third issue, as I mentioned, how we generate our electricity. Different countries and different states, who is responsible for electricity is different. But many cities do have responsibility. The city of Toronto owns its own utility, for example. Austin, Texas. Texas, Houston is the world capital of oil, arguably, at least certainly thought so in the United States. Austin, Texas has a huge percentage of solar, and it's growing generation driven by the city government and by the mayor there. Boston, Massachusetts, which does not own its own utility, unlike Austin, has decided to partner with others to have clean power purchasing contracts. So it's changing the market, even though it's outside the jurisdiction of the city. And the fourth issue in which significant steps are being made is solid waste. And how solid waste is managed matters enormously, because methane is a very serious polluting greenhouse gas. Sao Paulo took an old landfill, capped it, used the methane to generate electricity, much lower pollution than simply allowing it to escape to the atmosphere, and trained local people, low-income people who lived around the landfill, who formerly worked in the informal sector, trained them to get good jobs at the power generating station. San Francisco is taking huge steps to lower waste, and this September in California we'll be making an announcement along with other cities about ambitious goals. And the city of Toronto has diverted nearly 70% of garbage from landfill by doing things like collecting compost, food waste separately and composting it. Really advanced and significant. And if you look at each of these areas, each of these strategies are involving technologies that exist today. And that's why they work, because cities are systematically addressing buildings, transportation, electricity, waste, and in doing so thinking, how do we include people, how do we include jobs while we dramatically lower carbon emissions? That's the work C40 does, and Angelina, that's my contribution for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David.
Thank you.
Благодаря нашему первому выступлению
Thanks to our first contribution, we managed to go around the whole planet. We have been to different regions, to different continents, to different countries. And now, as we are in Moscow City, I would ask a question to Anton Kolbachevsky that represents Moscow government. And I would ask Anton to tell us something about what is going on in Russian capital and what practices of green and sustainable development are being implemented for the management of Russian metropolis, and what the city's priorities are for sustainability. So our roundtable is titled Eco-Ambitions, and I would like to start by saying that eco-ambitions is not a matter of ambitions, but the matter of survival of a city and competitiveness in long-term perspective. And though we have this eco in the title, our roundtable is not about environment, but about the city and the future that this city opts for, and the decisions that the city makes today. These decisions that we are making in the city sets a vector of development for 30, 50 years ahead. So that is 2-3 generations ahead. And the urban planning decisions that are being implemented in the city have even a longer-term perspective. What we are constructing and commissioning today shows how we manage the territory and resources, and it creates the legacy for future generations. And what questions do we need to ask when we take decisions? Yesterday, the pioneer decisions such as to enhance environmental requirements, to fuel, monitoring of emissions at factories, systems of natural reserves, systems of snow cleaning and collection, and others enabled us to decrease air pollution in Moscow, despite the growth of population and vehicles per person. And naturally, it is hard to provide heating and electricity to a population, cutting the emissions. We have 400 programs in Moscow, and we have direct and indirect expenses for environment. As for what we would like to see tomorrow, to answer this question, we proceed from environmental and technological issues, and we come to different environment and administration matters. And we understand that all the aspects of urban living are connected. And Moscow, by the way, reduced its emissions by 20%. We are the only city of Russia that is part of C40, and David will confirm that 10,000 measures that can bring economic effect also give environmental effect and the benefit to the city. And please believe me that those solutions that can be implemented in Moscow are being implemented now. I believe it's also worth mentioning the Green Index that comes up with a matrix of priorities for all cities. Moscow is not yet there, and there are American and European cities that are in this index, but we are trying to apply it for ourselves as well. And the main requirement in this index is that the share of the population that goes to work by public transport in the recent 7 years in Moscow, the number of public transportation has grown by 49%, and that proves serious changes in transportation systems. And our main requirement is compliance with the environmental requirements for transportation. Naturally, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions is one of our priorities, and Moscow has practically the same specific indicators for greenhouse gas emissions as in Greater London, and we have commissioned over 25 million of square meters of real estate that were connected to heating without the growth of emissions, and that is a positive thing for our city. We believe that the fuel that we have saved for the recent years can be used for heating, and we can say that 2 million Muscovites live in carbon-free city. That is our main ambition, and we want this number to increase annually. We have certain reserves in energy, and we have certain reserve strength, and Evgeny will give you more detail on that. And the only thing I would like to mention here as well is that we are trying to apply technologies, for example, in our metro in Salaryevo. We launched a pilot project of the measurement of heat, of emissions, and it can help us save heating emissions by metro. And we also use the heat of the earth. We have special heat pumps for metro, and it might seem yesterday for you, but for our city that is know-how and innovation. And our construction industry is also introducing green standards everywhere, and all the advantages of green construction, I believe, are known to you, and the advantages of the buildings constructed according to the green standards. Regrettably, in the Russian Federation, these standards are not yet mandatory, and but we have studied all European, English, and American green standards, and we are ready to move in that direction, and a lot is being done in that respect in Moscow. Other important goals and indicators is PM 2.5, PM 10 air pollution. Shows positive dynamics in Moscow, but we have to fight this pollution because that harms the health of Muscovites. And we have to also use water, consume water rationally. And in the recent year, water consumption has reduced by 9%. And there is also expert appraisal of environmental policy and other programs and activities that Moscow government is implementing that are considered through the environmental prism. The role of the nature is our legacy, and historically we have over 50% of the territory of the city that has greenery, and the evolution and auto vehicle boom took place at the late 1990s, early 2000s. So all the European cities had gone through this boom early on. So we were able to learn from this experience. But anyway, I can say that the value of nature is becoming clearer if we manifest it through economic categories. We have learned to do that, and we have calculated that the recreation ecosystem potential of urban territories of 1 hectare is around $10,000, and forest and park territories free 40 tons of dust per year and increases the moisture of air by 15%. That is an equivalent to the lowering temperature by 3-4 degrees, and it lowers the noise level. And we have a lot of reserves to increase the areas of greenery, and we reorganize industrial areas and territories now. They account for 20% of the territory of old Moscow, and we believe that reorganization of these industrial areas will also give us potential for further sustainable development. And the concept of sustainable development have been transformed by the notion of environment. Now, environment is considered the same as sustainable development and green development, and environment can bring benefit, and that is a choice in all areas of city administration.
It's a mandatory condition for all the standards of living to support this, and that means how the 2 generations afterwards are going to be healthy and wealthy, talking about the quality of life. This is the moral value. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Anton, for the main particular measures which are being implemented in Moscow and about your results that have been achieved thanks to these measures, and for voicing the new priorities for Moscow in terms of development as an environmentally sustainable city. Next question I'd like to ask to Felipe Calderon. Several speakers at our table have already talked and mentioned your plenary session speech, which is very close to our hearts, and personally me, when I have mentioned, I remember the phrase that these cities are at the forefront of tackling the climate changes. And the things that are done in the cities are very important, even more important, which is done on the federal and state levels, on what those and other political leaders are doing. Apart from your being from Mexico, you're a citizen of Mexico City, and Mexico City is one of the biggest cities in the world. It is a metropolitan area like Moscow with huge population. And my question to you, how can we provide sustainable development of such big cities, of people more than 10 million population, and cities which are continue to grow?
Well, definitely the problem is a little bit bigger when the cities has the size of Mexico City, which 22 million inhabitants in a metropolitan area. So the first advice is don't be like Mexico City. No? It is important to escape from that trap. Not only the number of people, but also the way in which the city was built in the last century in it's a big disorder. You know, a lot of settlements, even irregular, illegal, in impossible places to provide public services and so on. Well, but at the end, the things we need to do are exactly around these 3 C's, we say, this communicated, coordinated, connected cities. We will add, for instance, more compact cities. So talking about compact cities, the first C is we need to push public policies in order to provide density to the cities. Basically, the message is this sprawling model of big cities growing and growing over 100 square kilometers of territory is not viable anymore. I know it is a favorite style of the American cities, no? Maybe because very flat the territory, but it's impossible. And in economic terms, it's so unproductive. So the time that people is losing every single day, for instance, a waitress in Mexico City, for instance, needs to take maybe 1.5 or 2 hours to reach his workplace another 2 hours to go back home, which is completely unproductive and inhuman. So, and it's also very polluting. So compact cities, that could be the way. And that's all those kind of public policies to promoting density in order, for instance, tax system that could have incentives to growing up buildings in vertical way instead of the sprawling model. Second point is communications or connectivity, which is what most city of Moscow is doing in an amazing way. That is the way to do exactly. We need massive transportation system at the point in which the people feel comfortable and happy to use them. No? It's crucial, but we in developing countries believe that or as our aspiration is to have a car and to travel in a car. It's the case of Mexican people or a lot of Latin American people. But at the very end, the most developed cities are those cities and the most developed families and the highest levels of society are transporting themselves in massive transportation system, even in bicycles. So the quality of life is inversely proportional to the use of vehicles in these massive cities we are living. So connectivity is key issue. Metro is, of course, the biggest solution, the most powerful one. It's also the most expensive. In my experience, bus rapid transit that David was mentioning is probably the most cost-effective solution for transportation, but that depends on the size of the city. A city like Mexico City is completely insufficient. Maybe Moscow is completely insufficient, but even though it would be great to have that massive transportation system as long as you are able to integrate with other mobility issues related with pedestrian zones and cycling lines and others. And finally, the other thing is coordination. In a metropolitan area like Mexico City, we need to find a way, in political terms, to take coordinated policies at federal and local level, and at local level with several municipalities around Mexico City, because sometimes are contradictory. I was mentioning that my government, when I was president, we pay a lot from public budget in order to finance the new line of metro, several kilometers of metro in Mexico City. And that's great, that part we were coordinated. But at the same time, the local authorities in Mexico City and the neighbor state of Mexico, they were building elevated highways, which is a policy promoting individual cars, which is contradictory. So, or one city has some speed limit in the highways, other city has another speed limit. So coordination is a key issue. And finally, the way in which we can improve public services. Waste management is crucial. The methane is a real problem in emissions in a lot of developing cities. That's the case of Mexico City. We need to manage that in a better way. Treatment of sewerage or use of water is a crucial issue. It's important for health, and it's important for also for carbon emissions. So that could be my comments about my experience related with Mexico City.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much, Felipe. I do hope that in several years we will be able to come to Mexico City and see the changes that are happening in your country, in your city. Next, I'd like to give the gift to Tadashi Matsumoto. He was one of the developers of the basic OECD policy, the policy of green growth for fast developing cities, for emerging countries. And my question concerns particularly the political foundation, the particular political priorities and the directions for the urban development which is necessary to be taken and used by cities, should be implemented in cities in order to achieve all those successes which has been mentioned by David, to have new goals which we have heard from other speakers. What are political priorities and what are the tools? What should we focus on in terms of the city development? What should be integrated in the principles of the urban development? So please take the floor.
Thank you, Angelina, and thank you for the organizer to invite me to this important panel. Mr. Calderon already mentioned the concept of green growth very clearly in the plenary session. I just don't like to repeat it, but just one word about the key concept of green growth is to avoid the trade-offs between economic development and environmental sustainability. It's not a relationship of trade-off, but it's a coexistence or try to achieve the two values together. So this is a very important concept. It was already mentioned, and OECD has been promoting this concept since 2009, and has been successful in a way that I see a lot of examples, as Ms. Amila was mentioning, and I like to see it in a more diverse context, not only OECD countries, but also in developing countries, because there are different contexts. And OECD has been supporting these activities through analytical work on urban green growth studies. So from my experience today, I like to focus on a few things. Maybe in terms of key priorities, I think I want to raise maybe three things. Well, first of all, key messages before going into the three key opportunity is that it's really a sense of urgency here. So since 2009 we are working, but I would say since 2015, after Paris Agreement, the global momentum of achieving this climate change policy is really high, I think. However, the challenge is so big, as already mentioned. I can also like to mention a few numbers. So worldwide, by 2050, we need to reduce between at least 40% to 70% to achieve the 1.5 degree or 2 degree goals. This is the amount. However, the trend is saying that with the current trend, it says CO2 emission is already increasing by 50% by 2050. So this gap is so big, so that it's very difficult to fill. The nationally determined contributions, these NDCs, which are required for every country, now we already know that by aggregating all the reported NDCs, we are not achieving the 2 degree target. It's already known, so more transformative dynamic changes are needed. And key message here today, I think I like to deliver, is that the whole of government approach, whole of society approach is really needed. And of course, here we see a lot of city experts here, but from my point of view, to be able for cities to work well, the role of national government is so important. So this message is a key. So that's why, as an organization like us, working with national government directly, we are advocating the role of cities, but to the national government, so that national policies can create the condition of for cities to work better. So just three key opportunities. First one is about national urban policies. I think the climate change discussion at the national level needs two-way processes. One, mainstreaming urban issues or city issues within climate change discussion. The other way is that within urban policy or national urban policy, we need to mainstream climate issue within that. So in this two-way process is necessary. And we are recently studying the global national urban policies. So we have identified about actually 108 national level urban policies, 108 countries who has a clearly stated national urban policies. We only found 10 of these which mentions climate change or climate resilience as an extensive focus of national urban policy. This is a very worrying, fact. So it's very important that urban policymakers need to include climate issues within national urban policies. Second point is about role of cities, but I already mentioned, and how national government can support cities to achieve the goals. And for example, already it was mentioned, these conflicting policies. it is happening at the national and local level. For example, national government has still a lot of policies to support fossil fuel policies, and this is really conflicting or even damaging the policies at the city level who wants to try to use more clean energies and so on. So we need to really coordinate these two levels of government. And then final point is already also mentioned, the metropolitan approach. It is very, very important because I see a lot of C40 cities or a lot of, advanced cities are really making efforts within their cities. But if you see just outside of such major cities, sometimes, surrounding cities are not able to coordinate or not able to do the same levels of work or efforts as a metropolitan area. So that's why OECD tries to identify, first of all, where is the city border? It's not the administrative border, but where is the area that we should really think policies at one level, and then try to match the governance structure to that area so that, all the municipalities can work together. Thank you very much.
Спасибо.
Thank you very much for your attention. We have listened to a short list of proposals in terms of the urban policy, how the cities can shift to the green rails of development, what is recommended by the international research agencies, what is recommended by OECD, and other city representatives which are implementing different policies. Now, I suggest we shift back to Europe. Barcelona. Barcelona has a reputation, one of the most sustainably developing cities. And today we have Salvador Rueda, who is the author of the super neighborhoods concept he's going to talk about. One of the main ideas of this concept is when we are trying to reduce the transport, the movement in the city, we need to create the maximum citizen-friendly infrastructure and to create new super neighborhoods, how these neighborhoods should look like and what should appear there.
I have changed my presentation because after that I listening, I think I need to introduce some different of my slides. Okay. Only I choose this. I think the planet is in risk. We have several variables that they cross the red lines. One of them is the CO2, but we have others. And I think our planet collapsed in several years, perhaps 50 years, 60 years. And the results perhaps will be a huge movement of people over the world. But we have a lot of meetings talking and talking and talking. But don't implement the politics and the projects with the level that we need to change this scenario. For this, I think it's necessary at the beginning to change our approach, technical approach, in relation to our cities. We need a new urbanism. We need to build cities, not suburbias. We need to regenerate our cities. The main responsibles of these impacts that previously I announced is the cities. Then we need to integrate all the aspects. In this table appear different aspects, but we need to integrate all the aspects. Eventually, I think it's necessary to develop some tools, technical tools, to change this process. For this, we are working and wrote a new charter for design new developments and also to regenerate the existing ones. This is the web. It's in Russian also, okay? And we need to go together to change with an ecosystemic approach to rethinking our cities with other principles. The city is the most complex ecosystem that the human beings have created. The most complex. And the unique possibility, in my opinion, is an approach, ecological approach. An ecological and models, ecological models, very simple, but the strategic elements inside of this model, in my opinion, we need to take account the compactness, the capacity. I agree with Felipe Calderon. We need some density. We need some complexity. It means the most organization that we can develop inside of our cities. It means the diversity of economic activities above all, but not also the NGOs, institutions, etc., spread in all the city. We need a new metabolism, and we need a new social cohesion. The equity is necessary in the new framework, okay? On the other hand, we need also new tools, but not only in technical tools, even in the governance. Okay, governance. What is the role of the cities in the current situation, institutions over the world, international institutions? The cities don't have the role that we need to develop this change. The second is the tools related with the fundings. What is the money that the cities need to change all of this? The cities have produced the 80% of GPD, but don't receive the money, necessary money, the fundings to change the current process. We need another tools related with the laws. Need to change the rules. A new framework, juridical framework. If not, it's impossible to change something so huge like this. And finally, we need also a new programs in education. We need to change our lifestyles. If not, it's not possible to change. And if not, the future is not assured. Thank you.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much, Salvador. Salvador has voiced to us new basic principles for urban development, for ecosystem urbanism, for the idea that is put forward in the Charter, whose name we have seen at the very beginning of his presentation. And at many extent, this approach is new, and I believe that to many participants of this session, it sounds like something that we have never heard before, something that you might want to learn more about. Then it will make sense to go to the website, have a look at the Charter, and the information is present in the Russian language there, and it might provoke you thinking on how the solutions that are put forward there can be integrated into the daily practices of urban management in Russia, among other countries, because we have a lot of guests of the forum from Russia. So, Salvador, thank you very much again. And now I would like to give the floor to George Ferguson. George used to head the city of Bristol when it used to be the green capital of Europe, and he's also the author and proponent of the concept of microplanning. At this forum, we are discussing a lot of macro, mega, large projects of transforming metropolises. But where is this micro level? I believe George will now try to share his ideas with us on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelina. I'm an architect. So you might think that I would propose master planning and big architecture, but you'd be completely wrong. I think that our cities are making a huge mistake when they think that the mega planning is going to be the answer to the threats that we have, that we heard Anton and Salvador particularly describing. The whole idea of micro-planning is it puts the future of the city into the hands of citizens. You can't have megacities the size that Moscow will be and just have a single center. We need polycentric cities that are not just geographically polycentric, but also have a different nature. So different parts of the city have their characteristics. I've been advocating 10-minute neighborhoods. Neighborhoods in which you can walk around, that you can reach all the services that you need within 10 minutes. 10-minute neighborhoods have to obviously operate within a bigger picture. The big picture, and I think we've heard Tadashi and others talking about the need to take action that brings the planet down to a safe level by 2050. The big picture must be for every city to target zero carbon by 2050. But you will not do that by big projects alone. Yes, the big transportation projects, Felipe, that you described, which I think were initiated in Curitiba by my friend Jamie Lerner, who was also an architect mayor. I think those are the sort of projects that we need. If we just concentrate on the very highly expensive projects or just rely on those, they will not happen in the majority of our cities. So going to the 10-minute neighborhood, you then encourage local entrepreneurs to take a pride in that neighborhood, to provide the essential facilities within that neighborhood, to work with the local authorities rather than leaning back and waiting for the local authorities to do things. Local business will do that, but it has to do it within this greater pattern. And by having local entrepreneurs, you're creating a much more sustainable circular economy, not just within those neighborhoods, but also within the wider city. So these local neighborhoods can be largely car-free. Okay, people maybe they require a car to get out of the city at the weekend, but to drive single drivers driving into the center of the city for work is madness, whatever culture you are in. And it is so sad to see India, China, South America, and megacities across the world having been cycle-friendly and cycle-dominated, and walking-friendly and walking-dominated, now becoming car-dominated by a minority of the population who are stealing the majority of the space in our cities. So let's be really tough on the car. It takes political courage, but we have to do it. So my guidance is, let's make our cities friendly for children. Let's have programs within our schools that are about not just healthy schools, but green cities. Get the children growing food so that they understand the importance of that. Let's concentrate on public health, not just on illness services, which we spend so much money on. So let's have a vision for cities that are good for children, because if they're good for children, they'll be good for all of us, rather than just saying they're good for citizens, which is the usual political speak. Thank you.
Спасибо, Ангелина, что вы дали.
Thank you, Angelina, that you have given me the floor to sum it up. I would like to save the time. I've taken it from the tip of my tongue. Let me introduce you briefly. I would like to say that you are the author of Moscow Climate Plan and expert in sustainable development. And I would also like to thank George for drawing us a picture of a totally another city. And I believe we will take it away with us from this room. Yes, we will take away this picture. And I would like to say that two images are born, Moscow and C40. And Moscow is a larger city and cold city. And the energy of Moscow and power of Moscow is that Moscow can heat 20, 25, 27 cities out of C40, the coldest cities of Scandinavia. And David, there is Toronto, Ottawa, Winnipeg. So around 26 cities can be heated by the power of Moscow. And with this gigantic capacity, we needed to elaborate the system in such a way that it should be effective. And that is a legacy of our predecessors and engineers, and 28% of Moscow energy are carbon-free. So we consume gas as much as Germany, and around 30% of our energy is non-carbon. That is a little bit from renewable and secondary energy sources generated by David, not electrical, but heating burden of the city. So it is so large that we can, I will repeat, heat 24 cities. And this efficiency is such that in the recent decade, the city, without stopping in its development, has reduced the fuel consumption and connected some other cities inside itself. But this effect, like Anton has mentioned, is not enough. We want more. And now the large-scale renovation project is ongoing. And that is also energy saving in the houses, in the buildings. And now we have 2.5 new buildings per 2 hectares, where it used to be 5 or 6 buildings. And energy burden will go down by 12–14%. And apart from heating, we have also water consumption. It will grow, but not twice, but by 7, 10, 11%. That is the price of the solutions that we are elaborating now, and we want them to be even more effective. We want foliage and greenery to be preserved, and that will be a challenge to new urbanism that Salvador mentioned, but we believe that we will succeed. I was in Japan long ago, practically 30 years ago, but I remember the brilliant park that the Imperial Palace in the center of Tokyo is located in. It is surrounded by water, by canals, and I also recall Emplas Boulevard in Barcelona. That impressed me a lot. We walked along it with pleasure. And Moscow refinery, I would say, has not that placid look as this Barcelona Boulevard or Japanese Palace, but the environment there is such that in the evening there are hares nearby. And I'm starting thinking, what is the driving force for that hare that leaves the Kuzminki forest to go to Moscow refinery? So we can see literally hares in Moscow refinery. What does it mean? It means that the city is becoming friendly. And there are foxes nearby as well, and squirrels that go to people's balconies. Naturally, they want to eat, and we feed them with pleasure. And elks from the so-called Elk Island or Lesiny Ostrov in Moscow are also there, and children feel that and they understand it. And that is the best way of nature-like. It is not like when we filter the pipe that does not emit that much of smoke. And in December, everybody felt the smell of smoke, and everybody started looking for the source of it, but they didn't find. But I would like to say that there is a certain movement here. What we are concerned with and what climatic changes are unpleasant for the city. Regrettably, we have a lot of water, steam emissions and low potential heat, and this heat pillow took the city to the state of resembling London with a lot of moisture, and it is unpleasant for different structures, for housing, for iron, and it accounts for 44% per year, and it means that our beautiful ladies cannot wear beautiful shoes in this period of time, and we need to carry umbrellas with us. We need to hide, and this period has prolonged recently. But we believe that we have to fight that in another way. We need to use it as an ally. We have to come up with the industry of adaptation that would enable us to see when it is coming closer, so that we can forecast these events and people would understand how to tackle them. And we believe that this kind of industry that would also turn this sorrow into something that would make us stronger is extremely important. And I would like to go back to the main idea that our roundtable started with. We cannot change climate strongly or massively, but we can use the changes that we are facing currently to develop the world further on for its good. I believe that is the goal for the sake of which we need to live and that we need to hand down to our children. Thank you very much, Evgeny. Time-wise, we would take two short comments from the first row speakers, and I would like to ask Igor Marjareta, a member of the Civic Council of the Federal Road Agency of the Ministry of Transport of the Russian Federation. Igor, you as an expert in transport, can you tell us what should be done with the transport in the city? Because transport is the main source of pollution in many cities. So what will your prescription be? I would speak for the machines, not because I do not like my city, but because I have children and I like my children, and I understand that we need to introduce new technologies, and we have to understand that not every economy would be able to afford these new technologies. And if Moscow purchases electrobuses, we need to understand that their price is 7 to 10 times higher than that of diesel buses. And revamping the bus fleet at one instant, even such a rich city would not be able to afford at one instant. And naturally, we also have to remember that technologies cannot catch up with our willingness to make cities environmentally friendly, because so far, regrettably, a battery that would take these electrobuses for a long time has not been invented yet. They need recharging and energy consumption in wintertime most of all. So to make our cities cleaner, I believe that we need to understand that unless we have this breakthrough in technologies and have the clean and cheap source of energy, we need to combine our wishes with our opportunities and what we can do. And those who say that by 2025 we will substitute all fuel and diesel vehicles with electro vehicles, that is not supported by the capabilities of our technologies. Thank you, Igor. And another comment from Vladimir Lukin from KPMG, who is an expert in environment and greenhouse gas emission reduction. And again, we go back to the matters of climate. So how can you sum up the global best practices in this area, and what can be applied in Moscow, where there is certain success and certain actions have been taken already?
Thank you very much, Angelina. So within the time limits, I would like to focus on what our previous speakers haven't mentioned yet. So talking about the best road practices and the experience which is being developed quite actively, we should speak about the financial mechanism to assess the risks connected with the climate change, particularly right now when over several years the climate changes have been mentioned as the second in terms of the priority threat after the mass destruction weapon. Now, the current economic community is developing and introducing the systems and mechanisms to financially assess the risk connected with the climate change. And right now, I would like to give you an example from St. Petersburg, city living. This is the native city of Angelina. That's why she's going to provide me with some extra time. St. Petersburg, as you know, is existing in the conditions of very strict climate situation connected with the precipitation, connected with the rainy days per year. So those are the trends that are being developed connected with the climate change. They lead to the situation when we see the increase in precipitation level and the higher intensity of precipitation. And according to the most conservative forecast, by the end of this century, the volume and the intensity is going to increase by 20% in terms of precipitation. Now the intensity of precipitation in St. Petersburg exceeds those projected levels used for the systems of sewage, of water sewage. Right now, the city is flooded by the rainy water. And talking about the risks and threats, so the flooding is not the major risk, as the most sewage systems in St. Petersburg, in Moscow, and other cities are connected with the surface water supply systems, and the volume of special sewage systems which source the surface systems are a threat to the sanitation issues. And these are particular investments in those sums of money which are required by the city to spend on the sanitation safety for the city. And another point which I would like to point out, that those initiatives in the climate change and low carbon development entail not only the risk assessment, but a huge number of new opportunities, first of all, connected with the climate, carbon, and green financing. So I'm not going to give those examples, which are in quite a number have been mentioned. So thanks to the climate financing in Russia, we have such an industry as the biofuel production, the production of biofuel. In Moscow region, the first projects on disposal of waste gas have been implemented. The MOS water sewage system used for power generation, thanks to this climate financing. And under these circumstances, I believe that the main direction and the main best practice to firstly unbiasedly reflect those threats connected with the climate change and to implement those, make use of those opportunities connected with the low carbon development. Such a practice is about effective financial assessment of those risks and the opportunities and implementation of this opportunity. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Vladimir. We are behind our time limits, 1 minute to Anton. So what are you going to take from this session from Moscow? Just of course, the song of Shevchuk, a very musician. It is everything I'm going to take out with me. Everything should be taken into account, as we don't have much time for these very important discussions. We want to talk about many things, but we quite narrowed our approach because of time limits. I'd like to thank everyone. The climate is changing. We need to do something about that. So thank you very much for your input. And dear guests, distinguished guests, thank you very much to all speakers and participants. Thank you, dear guests, for your attention, and sorry for lack of time on discussing. We have very strict agendas, strict timing. I hope that you have learned something. If you want to speak with our speakers, so please do it out of the hall, as in several minutes. We are starting a new session in this hall, but they are going to be available for your questions for some time. Thank you very much and enjoy your evening.